be a little late, so I think we can get this party started.
Yeah, he didn't have time.
I am Scott Andrews. I'm chairman of the Portland Development Commission, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today for this first of what we think might be a regular series of joint meetings of the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission and the PDC Board of Commissioners. I think by working together, we can maximize opportunities to bring the type of development and employment to Portland that will keep this a great place to live, work, and play. Today, we're going to focus on the Central East Side. I think we have the next Pearl District South Waterfront-sized opportunity in front of us today, but I want to emphasize size and not scope. We know that the industrial sanctuary is huge, and there's a lot of people that think that the best thing to do is to maintain most of the character that's there. So it's going to be a balancing act. Our goal today is to understand how we can shape this opportunity and provide maybe some guidance to staff as they work to seize it. I'm going to start by asking my commission to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to hand the meeting over to Andre Baugh to comment, introduce his commission, and speak about Planning and Sustainability's commission role, capacity, activities, and tools. And then I'm going to do the same thing for PDC, and we'll finally turn it over to staff executive teams to present the opportunity. So I'll have PDC commissioners introduce.
Tom Kelly.
And I am Aneshka Dixon, and thank you all for being here on this rainy, windy day.
And unfortunately, Charles Wilhoit just called in, was not able to make it, and Commissioner Mullis will be here at about 5 this afternoon. So they're looking forward to meeting you. Andre?
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm going to first just have my board go around and introduce themselves, and so.
Mike Hauk, Planning and Sustainability Commission member.
Michelle Rudd. Karen Gray.
Don Hanson. Chris Smith.
Gary
Gary.
Oxman.
Just looking to see who else is here.
Moving over there. Thank you. Talk a little bit about what our role as a Planning Sustainability Commission is, and how we look at not only Central City 2035, but how we look at the city. And really, our role starts at what's called the Portland Plan. That's a document that we passed back in 2012, which really lays out the framework for Portland for the next 20 to 2035. And it lays out a series of matrix and measurements, 12 measurements that the city will be measured by as we go forward. And part of that, those are equity, prosperity, growth, jobs, education, active transportation, complete neighborhoods, health, safety, and healthy watersheds of the environment. And as we look at those, equity is a lens that we use to look at virtually everything as we that comes before us. And what comes before us is obviously the zoning code, but we also have street vacations, tax increment district, housing policies, transportation policies. We have kind of a next step that is the climate action plan. So that's the sustainability component of our work. And that really is connected to the Portland plan in saying, how do we do what we say we're going to do in terms of growth and health, and also have a city and really, I guess, an earth that we want to live in. So how does that connect to the transportation, to sidewalks, to active bicycles, and those things, but also to the jobs and to the environment and to parks and to the type of plants we have. And then down from there, where we are today is in the comp plan. And so that really is kind of our implementation tool, if you will. So that's how are we going to do it? And we are hopefully We're going to wrap that up by the end of this year and move that on to council. And I would just make one point. For the most part, we make recommendations to council. So we will put something will come before us. We will take a vote and then pass on to council with a recommendation. And then council is the final arbiter of that and approval process. And then after the comp plan really is a zoning code, that really is the part that then gets down to how it's administrated. And from that standpoint, we work very closely with Susan's group, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. They really staff us and provide us the expertise and really the outreach that we expect from the community, and we want from the community the diverse views to hear as we ponder whatever's before us. And Susan's group is part of that process. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Maybe I'll start first by talking about PDC, and maybe you know all of this, so maybe this is completely redundant, but we've been the city's redevelopment agency since we were voted into existence in 1959. The organization has changed its focus and direction several times, almost always in concert with national redevelopment trends and economic factors. Over time, PDC became the city's economic development organization and redevelopment agency, and we became much more focused on jobs with the city's adoption of the Portland Economic Development Strategy in 2008. Not bad timing given the financial debacle of 2009. Commission members are nominated by the mayor and they're appointed by city council for 3-year terms. We're not a city agency, but we are tied to the hip as city council sits as our budget committee. And we don't send recommendations to city council. We actually take action. So the buck stops here, but we spend a lot of time and effort to communicate with city council on all the programs and development and effort so that they're up to speed and are part of the discussion before we actually vote on it. In my 5+ years on the board, we've gone from 230 to 95 employees. The first hunk of those went over when the Housing Bureau was formed and our housing folks moved over to the city. Annual expenditures have gone from an excess of $250 million a year to next year's budget's $175 million. But actual TIF proceeds have declined at a much greater rate. And this is due to a lot of the sunsetting of districts and districts coming to the end of their natural life. We only have 3 districts with what I would call large capacity left: Interstate, North Macadam, and the River District. And we're currently working with the mayor on a plan that would expand and extend Central East Side, the area that we're talking about today. Things we do: we work extensively to create, retain, and expand local companies, and we work closely with Greater Portland, Inc. to recruit. We manage all the city's economic development work. We've added significant depth in the last couple of years to neighborhood economic development efforts, and we've made that a priority. We continue to address equity gaps, and we've led the way in requiring MWESB contractors on our projects and helping contractors and minority firms connect. We oversee the city's efforts around workforce training and development. We provide loans, grants, and assistance to growing businesses, developers, and community agencies. We also continue to promote our sustainability leadership and image and generate new opportunities, both domestic and international. And we recently developed the Greater Portland Export Plan with a goal to double exports from the region in the next 5 years. And the way we do that, frankly, is through small business and community development grants and loans, business development lending, housing through the Portland Housing Bureau, infrastructure, transportation, and park funding, and commercial property redevelopment loans and grants. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Central East Side before I hand it over to staff. The southeast quadrant includes the entire southeast Central East Side Urban Renewal District. It's currently home to about 17,000 jobs and 1,100 companies. And interestingly, this was the only district to grow employment during our economic downturn, in part due to a growing presence by Portland's traded sector businesses in that location. Key elements to the area's evolution that have made it attractive to a variety of businesses and helped it outperform includes our own investment in adaptive reuse of buildings such as the Holman Building and the Eastside Exchange, and our Produce Row and Startup Challenge. Today, PDC is focused on the opportunities at the south end of the district where we've been an active partner, including our investment in the Central Eastside multimodal transportation infrastructure, such as the streetcar, and most recently $10 million towards the Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail. The light rail line is going to open in 2015. That's pretty exciting, and it includes 2 stations within and adjacent to the URA with an area that has multiple large floor plate redevelopment opportunities that could accommodate existing businesses, growth, or attract new industries and employment to the district. The expansion under consideration includes the opportunity to bring Clinton Triangle Station and surrounding area into the URA, enabling the city to invest future dollars in strategic development along the alignment and further levering the investments in light rail made to date. So that's the context. I guess I'm going to hand this over to Susan and Kimberly, who is taking over Patrick's job while he's at having fun at jury duty.
Good escape as any. You didn't hear that.
So thank you. We're all here today to talk a little bit about the Central East Side, and I think as staff from the Bureau of Planning Sustainability, Transportation, and PDC, and I've worked for the city now for over 15 or 16 years, and during that time, I've never seen the bureaus be less silo in terms of actually working together, in terms of kind of exchange, in terms of partnership. These 3 people here, I think, have been sort of joined at the hip, for example, on a whole lot of different kinds of projects. So I think that's just something I wanted to let y'all know, that has improved a lot. From planning perspective, 2 years ago, both the PDC and the Planning and Sustainability Commission will remember this document, which is the Central City Concept Plan. The City Council adopted that about 2 years ago. The central kind of idea behind that is that the Central City will remain the regional center for all of Portland and for all of the suburban areas, and that we really continue to focus not just on jobs and employment, although that would be the main focus, but also to make the Central City a place where people can live and work, and that those things are blended together. You know, you look back to the last time we did a Central City Plan, which was in the late 80s, and at that time there was just sort of a, you know, maybe some of you were a part of that, I don't know. At that time, just even the thought of what became the Pearl or what became South Waterfront were just sort of a dream. And I think that's really what we're doing here with this new Central City Plan, is thinking of the big thoughts and thinking of where we can go. So the concept plan also was featured, in case anyone gets, this is not an ad for them, but I just saw this morning in Portland Monthly Magazine. In it, there is a 2-page map, which basically shows from the concept plan. So only in Portland could you have a magazine with some, you know, sort of geeky planning thing being the centerfold. So there you go.
Centerfold.
The centerfold of Portland Magazine is a map of Portland.
Talk about
so.
a weird city.
Central City Plan, we adopted, besides the concept plan, we're doing quadrants. One of them is the Central East Side. We're also working on the west side and north and northeast Portland, which we completed that plan earlier. For background also, we have a stakeholder advisory committee on for the Central East Side. Debbie Kitchen, who is in the audience right there, and Don Hansen are the co-chairs of that group. They are moving swiftly. I think they would attest to that. We're trying to get this all wrapped up in a 12 to 16-month kind of process so that we can move on, because I know people have been wanting, the companies that are there want some assurances about what is going to happen. Also, sort of as an aside, we've been able to get a significant amount of what I'd call kind of free expert advice from the Urban Land Institute, ULI. Mayor Hales applied, I guess it was the end of summer or fall, for Portland to be chosen as something called the Daniel Rose Fellowship. And so for the past 5 or 6 years, they've chosen 4 cities each year. Portland was chosen this time along with Memphis, Honolulu, that's why she's tan, Honolulu, and Indianapolis. And we've done exchanges between the cities. We have common issues, common sets of problems. They came here, and many of you had an opportunity to meet with some of them. It was sort of a SWAT team of 7 or 8 people, consulting both designers, engineers, and developers. They came to town for 3 days and did lots of tours, did lots of stakeholder meetings, and came up with their best ideas on some of the things that should happen from their perspective for the Central East Side. When they first came in, the first thing they said was, "What's the problem here? You guys are growing. You have, a vibrant industrial area right near your core." And so at first they didn't see the issues that we see, but once they got into it, they realized that there's just all of the conflicts and the transportation issues and the potential demand for making it like the Pearl, which is not something that, at least so far, anyone has really wanted to move in that direction. So we're looking for your ideas, and we were really excited to be able to bring both groups together, both PDC and the commission, the Planning and Sustainability Commission. I think you have different perspectives in some ways, and I think it would be really great if once or twice a year we can, especially when we're going to brief both groups on something anyways, to bring you both together and so you can learn from each other.
Great, thanks. So I know Patrick is really disappointed not to be here, and he's really enjoyed the exercise, but I've gotten a chance as well to look from the sidelines and see what this has all been about. So a couple observations, and then staff are going to dig in. And Leah, I think you might say something. No? Maybe sure. Staff will dig in. So the first, like Susan said, is that we have a great problem. These are good problems. We have both traditional manufacturers and new technology firms who want to be and grow in that area. We have new transportation options that are coming online. And we have a lot of developers and property owners who want to redevelop and who want to invest in the area to meet the space needs that are coming forward. So it's a good problem. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean that we know the solutions, but it's a good problem to have. The second is that I think what you'll see today through the recommendations that the ULI fellows, the ULI panel, I guess it's called, gave to us is they really recommended that we take an employment plan, not just a land use plan. So it's kind of a comprehensive approach. And I think that's consistent with what Susan was talking about in terms of us being all here together, coordinating with not just city bureaus, but also workforce development providers, our key anchors, our private sector partners. We really need to figure out together how we can work and make this a great 21st century employment district. And so it's not just a land use issue. It's not just how we use urban renewal or how we extend and expand the boundaries, but what are we going to do together? And then the third thing is that a lot of the recommendations are things that we're already doing. So we're starting from a good spot. I think we're optimistic that we'll be able to deliver on what ULI has recommended that we're going to do. There are some things that we might not take advantage of, but I think we're optimistic that I think it's been a helpful reinforcement of some of the things that we were already doing. So I do want to point out Geraldine Moyle from our staff who has been doing a lot of the work here, and then Lisa Abwaf, who's also Central City Manager. Leah, did you want to?
Sure. So my name is Leah Treat. Many of you probably, I've not met many of you before. This is my first opportunity to be with you. I am the new 7-month transportation director for the city of Portland, and have had a blast being here for the last 7 months and love this city, and I'm still learning a lot. And I got pulled into, or had the opportunity to join this fellowship because of the transportation initiatives that are going on in the Central East Side. And one of the things that I love to talk about, and this presents me the opportunity to speak about, is the Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail Bridge. This is my favorite subject to talk about. I refer to this bridge literally as Michelangelo's David. It's taking on Goliath. We are building a bridge that is going to handle freight capacity, but is going to be limited to transit and pedestrians and cyclists. and it's also going to be seismically sound. So it's also very critical to the city in that vein. But it's also going to connect the east and west sides, these two very different sides of the city. It's almost bridging an intellectual gap if you think about what sits on both sides of that bridge. And on top of that, we have a light rail system that's coming through, and two of the stops for the light rail system are going to plunk right into the Central East side. And you all in Portland have been here long enough to see what transit does and what kind of demand it brews. So I think it's a very exciting opportunity for growth in the Central East side, but it's also presenting some enormous challenges because of the types of growth that want to be around those stations that are opening up. So I don't want to steal their thunder about a lot of the presentation because they're going to go over this in detail, but I do want to mention that I think it's important that we're having this meeting tonight because even though we have had a set of recommendations given to us from the ULI, we have not as a city determined exactly what we're moving forward with, and your input is going to be critical to us in how we decide to move forward with the Central East side, and that needs to be done collectively. So I thank you for your time on this presentation tonight.
Okay, I guess it's me. I'm trying to figure out how we see this because it's not up on our screen. But I'm Troy Doss with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Yeah, it's no big deal. Yeah, and I'm going to give you an overview of the Southeast Quadrant Plan, talk a little bit about our collective roles in it, and more specifically about what the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability is role is in this whole effort. As mentioned, we're each doing separate things on this. This is kind of a quick little overview of what we'll be talking about, but it's also kind of reflective of what individually the Bureau's responsibilities are on this plan, and how we're working to integrate these different things to inform each other's process. So with regard to Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, I think Andre hit this pretty well, but it's worth kind of covering again is that our quadrant plan is really an outgrowth of the plans that precede it. So we have the Portland plan, which is really setting the overall strategic direction for the city as a whole. That's informing our comprehensive plan, which is our policy framework for the city, which then in turn influences the direction for our district level planning, such as the Central City 2035 effort. And then to break that down into yet another thing, because we do love the plan, is to have a quadrant level planning. So what we've done in the Central City is we've broken it down. Initially it's called quadrant plans because we were going to have 4 of them. We were going to have 2 on the west side. We decided to combine those into one, where that's being processed currently. We completed the Northeast Quadrant Plan about a year ago, and now we're engaged in the Southeast Quadrant Plan. Having a hard time hearing me. Okay. That's unusual. So Northeast Quadrant Plan. What is a quadrant plan? Let's go ahead and talk about a little bit what a quadrant plan is, because in this case it's not what you're typically used to with our plans. We would come in, we would do a district plan, it would have policies, it would have zoning that goes into effect pretty much at adoption. In this case, because we're tracking behind the comp plan a little bit, we want to make sure that we get ourselves in sync with that process. We're also wanting us to spend a little more time really trying to nail it and get it right in the district. So what we're doing is we're putting together land use proposals, we're putting together some idea about the kind of land use zoning we would put in place, as well as the kind of entitlements we put in place. But it also allows us to kind of start looking at strategies that might be brought in, what our overall transportation needs would be, what our infrastructure needs would be, and so forth. So what these things happen is they go to council and they are adopted basically by resolution until such time that the comp plan's done, and then we will come in with a zoning package that will implement the whole package, as well as allow us to kind of update our 2035 goals, because the concept plan we adopted 2 years ago, we're effectively test driving as we take these quadrant plans out. So the Southeast Quadrant, it is really the entire Central East side. So what you know traditionally as the Central East side subdistrict, that is the focus of the Southeast Quadrant Plan. However, we are looking at 2 additional areas. One is what we call the Banfield Portal South, which is because there's a Banfield Portal North in the Northeast Quadrant Plan, but that's an area that really surrounds Benson High School. It's not an area where we see a lot of zoning changes, but there's maybe some consideration about whether the entitlements, the height and the floor area ratios are right there, and that's something we'll be addressing at some point in the planning process. But more immediately, we're really looking at the Clinton Station area because of its role in terms of it being one of the major 2 station areas for light rail that's coming into the Southeast Quadrant. And that's an area that currently is outside the central city, but one that very likely could become part of the central city through this effort. Give you a quick overview because this is a large district. It's about the size of the downtown core, but it is surprisingly simple in its zoning when you compare it to other parts of the central city. So what we have is primarily industrial zoning. All of the gray areas here represent one form of industrial zoning or another. Most of it happens to be IG1 for those of you who follow such wonky things, but what that really means is it's a light manufacturing kind of zone. That's where we have manufacturing, industrial services, warehouse and distribution. But we also are starting to see some other industries coming in, and we'll talk about that in a moment. In addition to that, we do have a fair amount of mixed-use zoning in this. It covers the corridor, so MLK Grand, covers Belmont, both sides of Morrison, both sides of Burnside, and part of Cooch, and part of 12th. And in those locations, it's zoning very similar to you have in the Pearl. You can do residential development, you can do Class A office, you can do retail. There's no limitation to that there other than your height and your floor area ratios, which tend to be pretty high here. They're on par with what you would find in the Pearl District as well. In addition to that, in about 2006, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, we adopted a thing called the Employment Opportunity Subarea, and it's located from 3rd Avenue to Water Street. In that area, you have a little more flexibility than you would typically see. It allows for things that we would try to call industrial office, and that would be things like software companies, architects and engineers, graphic design, industrial design. And then another key feature of this is we've just made some pretty significant public investments in this district. We've extended streetcar through here. We're about to close the loop going into South Waterfront, and we're adding Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail, which we think is probably going to change the southern area in ways that we really can't even fathom. So we're trying to get ready for what that might mean. So what's the big issue here? Industrial sanctuary policy was noted earlier, and I think it's worth noting that this policy was adopted in 1970. It was created in 1970s, actually. It was adopted in 1980. And it really looks at preserving manufacturing, the manufacturing function of the Central East Side and other industrial districts. It's been very effective. I think it's part of the reason that we have, it keeps residential development out. It keeps retail and traditional office development at very low quantities. So it's been very successful in maintaining this as an effective industrial district for over 3 decades. But what it's interesting to note is that this looks at manufacturing as it existed in 1980. And so, and a lot of the implementation tools that came along with it and then haven't been changed very much also look at manufacturing and industrial services in a very similar way. So I don't know about you, but in 1980, most of us didn't have a computer on our desk. If we did, it was a Tandy or a compact. If you had a cell phone, it was like the size of a brick. No one would have imagined that there's entire industries today that are going to be built around something that takes the computing power of one of those things and multiplies it by 100, and it's also your phone. On top of that, you have whole industries making apps for this district, or for this industry. They're located in this district. On top of that, if it wasn't enough, we have people who are making apparel for these computers. So I mean, and there are people who are doing all of these things in the Central East Side. It's something that our policy framework and our implementation tools really couldn't have envisioned when this was developed. And so going forward, what we're trying to figure out is what's the next version of this. So we're talking about an industrial employment sanctuary that tries to broaden this a little bit, maintains our manufacturing or industrial service base, but also expands it to increase capacity for these new industries that are coming into the district. I think that's going to be pretty critical. And as we try to find ways to implement this strategy or this policy, we need to have enough flexibility in whatever we do put in place that envisions the things like this that we can't possibly imagine they're going to happen in the next couple of decades. So what's going on in this district? As mentioned, this is an area that's really been growing. It's done incredibly well during the last business cycle and during the recession. It's outpacing the central city. It's outpacing the city as a whole. And one of the things that's really made that happen is this employment opportunity sub-area. It was adopted in 2006. It's about a 48-acre area, so it's not a very large area in comparison to the rest of the district, but it's an area where we've seen 1,000 jobs developed since 2008 as a response to the provisions that it put in place. It's done it with by adding a number of businesses. This is a total, there's about 221 businesses in this area, but it's added about 40 businesses since its adoption. And as a result, it hasn't really had the impact a lot of us feared. We've lost 1 industrial business during this period. So we're not seeing displacement occurring as a result of this additional flexibility. most of the development that has happened has not been new development. It's really been the rehab of existing industrial structures to allow for this new thing, industrial office. And it's represented by projects that you're very familiar with. It'd be things like the East Bank Commerce Center or Olympic Mills. So going forward, what we're really working on with our stakeholder advisory group is looking at what is this new idea about industrial sanctuary? What do we want to put in place here? What are the types of things that we want to continue to keep in the district, but also expand our ability to bring into the district new jobs, new industries, and also identify the kind of things we want to keep out of the industrial zoned areas. At the same time, we want to start looking at what's the role of our mixed-use corridors here. We have a lot of capacity in those mixed-use corridors. In fact, there's something close to probably the same amount of capacity that remains in the Pearl or more in these corridors. So we have a lot of ability to provide residential, office, and retail growth there. We want to figure out how to do that in a way that actually benefits the rest of the district. And then, very importantly, we want to look at the Southern Triangle, which we've been talking about. It's an area that's very different than the rest of the district. It has, beyond access to light rail and streetcar, it has one of the few places where you can get down to the river in the district. It also has a large lot configuration, usually under single ownership, something we don't see elsewhere in the district. And a lot of those lots are available for redevelopment or currently vacant. So it's an area where we really want to think about what is the role in this area in terms of providing job growth for those companies that succeed elsewhere in the north end of the district, maybe want to expand. And we also want to think a lot about what's the connection between this district and South Waterfront, where Geraldine and Wes will spend a lot of time working, because we're starting to see some opportunities potentially with spinoff that could happen with PSU and, more importantly, OHSU, especially if the night challenge comes to fruition. And we think that some of the things that happen there could potentially start to spin off and start creating jobs in the Southern Triangle. So with that, I think I'll pass it over to Geraldine. One of the things we do want to identify, though, is we do look at these kind of other lists that our land uses strategy alone isn't going to get us anywhere. We have to think about what is our overall transportation strategy. There's a number of transportation issues that have to be addressed in this district if we're going to move forward with higher job densities. And as Kimberly alluded to, this can't be a zoning exercise alone. It really has to be built on economic development strategies.
Thank you, Troy. My name's Grant Moorhead. I'm with the Bureau of Transportation, and I'm the liaison from PBOT to the Southeast Quadrant Plan. So I'm going to talk about the ULI recommendations. The homework that they gave us really fell into three broad categories that are on the screen now, and I'm going to talk about how each of these fits into our existing work plan for the Southeast Quadrant. It actually fits in quite nicely with what we're doing as part of our planning efforts. The first issue has to do with freight circulation. One of the first questions that the ULI group had during their work session was, how do we distinguish between streets in the district in terms of providing truck access? And the answer, perhaps surprisingly, is that we really don't, at least not in this district. Our transportation system plan, which is part of the comprehensive plan, has a hierarchical street classification system. So every street in the city is classified for traffic, transit, bicycles, pedestrians, freight, emergency response, and street design. But in the Central East Side, the whole district is classified as a freight district. So what that means from a policy perspective is that all the streets are treated the same. And a corollary to that is that not only are streets within a freight district treated the same, but streets across freight districts are also treated the same. So our policy tools for truck access are the same in Rivergate as they are on the Central East Side. And we're finding increasingly that that is not a workable situation, particularly as the district evolves and things change. The demands on the street system continue to evolve. It becomes a little bit more multimodal. We need to start to develop a more nuanced approach to providing for truck access within this district. And we're going to be working within our stakeholder group. We have a transportation subcommittee, and we're going to work with them to start to answer those questions and start to think about it in a little bit more of a nuanced way. And we have a template for this. It's called the Central East Side Street Plan, and it was developed in 2010, and it looked at a really narrow part of the district. It looked at the employment opportunity sub-area that Troy mentioned. So what we did for that plan was we went through block by block and came up with a classification system for each street. And it was based on more the actual function of how it's working in the district today. And we developed guidelines for allocation of space within the right-of-way. So sidewalks, stormwater, travel lane width, intersection design, corner turning radius, that sort of thing. For example, we classified Southeast 2nd Avenue as a truck loading street. And we created special provisions for head-in or I guess back-in parking for trucks to unload. It allows for loading docks to be located in the right-of-way where typically the sidewalk corridor would be. That's not something that you would find in our Title 17 street standards, but we have a unique situation there. So we really want to apply that approach to the entire district. And I don't know if we're going to get to the level of detail that we're going to need as part of the quadrant plan. We may need a refinement phase, but we're going to work with our subcommittee to start to talk about that. The first meeting is actually tomorrow night to start to look into that issue. Parking, always a hot topic. This is something we've been looking at for a while already. In late 2012, PBOT adopted the Central East Side Parking Management Plan, and that looked pretty exclusively at on-street parking, and it did four main things. It consolidated our time zones, parking time limits on the street. It streamlined the process for obtaining a permit if you wanted to exceed that time limit. That's something that's geared toward employees in the district. It created a new meter district, and it established a Transportation and Parking Advisory Committee, or a TPAC. Now that organization, the TPAC, is envisioned to have an integral role in the ongoing implementation of all of the recommendations of the plan. They're just really getting off the ground now, but our staff is working with them to develop a comprehensive transportation and parking demand management strategy for the district. That's just getting underway now. It's expected to take about a year. So off-street parking, that's really a zoning code issue, and that's something that we'll be addressing through the overall central city planning process. Our transportation subcommittee has met already to discuss this. We talked about code provisions that could be put in place that would maybe be a little bit more effective in regulating how off-street parking is utilized and built. We had a study from a little over a year or two ago that showed that during the peak demand period for off-street parking, which was defined as between noon and 1 p.m., only about 60% of the parking spaces were occupied. So that's a bit of a startling statistic, given that the district can feel so underparked. So one of the possible causes of that are accessory use requirements in the zoning code, and that's a bit of a detail for today. But we're going to look at that and other issues central city-wide. As we get into the implementation phase, once the quadrant plans are done, we're going to look central city-wide at all of the parking regulations, and with the idea that we'll come to the Planning Commission and the City Council with some policy and code changes probably toward the end of 2015, next calendar year. Streetscape and placemaking. So if you go down to particularly the southern end of the district right now, you'll see a construction zone. You'll see what could be considered a bit of a blank slate. It's really easy to see a lot of opportunities down there for placemaking. As others have mentioned, when the light rail line opens in a little over a year, we'll have 2 new light rail stops. We'll have a new multi-use path that leads essentially from Powell all the way to the river, where it will, of course, connect with a new bridge that connects the two sides, the burgeoning districts of the Central East Side and the South Waterfront District. So it provides us really with a unique opportunity to re-examine everything from the street grid to streetscape elements, and really just overall development patterns in the district. So in the southern end of the district, in particular around the Clinton Station, we're looking at a number of infrastructure and development scenarios that we're calling part of the strategic sites analysis that PDC is conducting. So Geraldine is leading that effort, and with that, I'll turn it over to her. Thank you.
So I'm Geraldine Moyle, and I'm a senior project manager with the Central City team at PDC. I'm going to talk about 3 items and then kind of wrap it up with some next steps and some questions for you to answer too. I'm going to talk about strategic sites, as Grant referenced, workforce partnerships, and business development. And so the first one is strategic sites. As part of the Southeast Quadrant partnership with BPS and PBOT, PDC has led an evaluation of a few strategic sites along the light rail alignment. So in this picture, you can see that alignment, and in the circles are the OMSI station and the Clinton station. And we picked sites and worked with the property owners of each site that were along various areas of the light rail. We were looking to test varying degrees of development, including what's currently allowed in the existing zoning, but then also what denser industrial and employment-oriented development could look like as you're starting to evaluate the Southeast Quadrant. The sites we looked at were the ODOT blocks, 550 MLK, which is up along the streetcar alignment at Stark Street, two TriMet sites that they had acquired as part of the light rail project. The Northwest Natural Gas site, which is the big pit along Milwaukee Avenue, and PGE, which is down by the Rhine Street Station. Concurrently with that, both OMSI and the property owners in the Clinton Triangle area were working on their own master plans and strategic site analysis, and we've been working with them as well. While we tested the concepts, we also had Johnson Economics provide a pro forma test for each of the development concepts as well. So they sold for residual land value. And when it was a development concept that had a residual land value that was positive, that meant that concept could work in the current market. If that residual land value in the pro forma was negative, that meant that project might need some assistance. In general, what we found were some key development issues that are helpful for the overall Southeast Quadrant process. First of all, in regards to structured parking in the Central East Side only pencils if you can charge for it currently. And the only area currently that you can charge for parking based on current demand and market is the Central District. So the ODOT blocks could be a viable place for immediate structured parking. The remaining sites may need some additional development around it where there's a demand for parking. Infrastructure-wise, we found that most of the sites had the capacity, utilities-wise, in terms of water and sewer and fiber and whatnot, to serve increased density, increased development needs for employment and industrial uses. There was kind of a test as you got to that fine line between 4 and 6 stories. There's a change in construction costs between mid-rise and high-rise development, and that change in construction cost impacted their pro formas, which leads us to the understanding that in the current market, the development along the light rail line is likely to be at the mid-rise level. So 5/1 development with ground floor retail and commercial, and then 4 stories above that. It's unlikely that you will see towers in the Central East Side in the immediate future. And then finally, most of the sites along the light rail alignment in the Central East Side are in the Innovation Quadrant Transportation System Development Charge area. So this part of the Central East Side, plus the area around PSU and North Macadam, all have 2 transportation system development charges that they would pay with new development. And while these charges are helping to pay for light rail and other improvements, it's also adding an additional cost to new development in the districts, which may extend the timeline for when you would see something happen along the light rail line. Based on that analysis and looking at all of these sites and working with ULI and their recommendations as well, we've come up with kind of a series of priority sites for where development is likely to be expected in the next few years. The ODOT blocks, and PDC is currently working with ODOT to acquire those pieces and then make them available for redevelopment. The Clinton Triangle, given that half of the Clinton Triangle is under city ownership and the other remaining half is under private ownership, there's an opportunity there to merge the two and really kind of get something triggered sooner rather than later. The OMSI area, they're actively working on a master plan. And then the 2 TriMet sites, which are in the middle of the area, when we tested those sites with TriMet, what was unique to those 2 sites is because they were acquired with federal funds for light rail, if they can show an increase in ridership for denser development, so say 5/1 industrial office versus a 1-story industrial building, they can actually transfer those sites for $0 because they've shown an increase in ridership. So those sites might be more viable for immediate development because there doesn't need to be a dollar value assigned, or TriMet doesn't actually need to get money back as part of the transaction. And then the final thing to note is the TIF resources that are available in the Central East Side. In our current budget, we have $5 million set aside for strategic sites, and that's anything from acquisition to environmental cleanup to redevelopment assistance or targeted employment focus of those projects. With the proposed URA expansion, it's estimated that there would be a projected $20 million coming off any URA expansion. So that's a total of $25 million. That's not a lot of money, and we have at least 5 priority sites, 4 priority sites that might need assistance, and that is not including any that might come out of the woodwork as we move forward with this area. I think the other thing to note is that this focus in the Southern Triangle, as both Grant and Troy have alluded to, there are larger parcels down here, and what we often hear is once you hit 10,000 square feet in the Central East Side, there's nowhere to go in terms of if you want to stay in the Central East Side. So these sites and this area provide that opportunity for buildings that have a larger floor plate of, say, 20,000 square feet or more, and more floors, so existing businesses and new businesses can grow and expand in the Central East Side. In regards to workforce partnerships, as Kimberly pointed out, ULI really recommended that we focus not only on land use, but we also focus on an employment strategy. And they kind of split it into two. They split it into workforce partnerships and they split it into business development. And while workforce is much more of a regional item being addressed at a regional level, at the district level for the Central East Side, we have identified some potential partners, some program needs, and some potential next steps to kind of start coordinating with everyone. Partners in the Central East Side could include Work Systems, Inc., Portland Public Schools, and I'll note for you that Benson High School is actually within the Central East Side. Our Portland Community College and their Climb Center is actually also in the Central East Side. It's down by OMSI and the Holman Building. OMSI, and then also ADX. And ADX is on the eastern side, kind of in the middle of the district, and it's a community space that provides opportunities for access to manufacturing equipment, classes, and also if you want to exchange knowledge in regards to those, what you're going to do with those equipment and what you might be creating in terms of craft manufacturing of small things like your phone apparel. In regards to program, we've currently identified two areas of potential program. The first is a marketing and branding effort to address the pipeline challenge. And so this is a way to attract interest from students, whether they be in high school or college or whatnot, in regards to the types of jobs and employment that might be needed in the district. And those types of jobs that might be needed and have family wage jobs without needing a college education. If you had the technical background, you could likely immediately grow into these jobs. And then the second is to work with the training providers, such as Portland Public Schools, PCC, and WSI, on the types of training that's needed to accommodate or to anticipate the changing nature in industrial jobs and what that training might be needed, whether it be technical or not. So with that, immediate next steps could be facilitating a conversation between Benson and PCC, and also facilitating a conversation with OMSI and the industry. OMSI is currently rehabbing or refurbishing, considering their turbine hall. That's where currently there's a lot of kid programs, if you will, children's programs. They're looking to maybe revamp that with a more industry focus, and so that could be an opportunity for different businesses in the district to start to partner with OMSI and highlight what they do and how you could potentially come to work for them if that was an area of interest. In regards to business development, again, it also has a regional approach and then a citywide approach if you think about our economic development strategy that we have in place. And so working with BPS and PBOT on the Southeast Quadrant effort, we're also starting to frame out a strategy for the Central East Side that acknowledges and refines both the city level and regional level if that's more appropriate for the Central East Side. And so partners in this effort could include the Central East Side Industrial Council, or district as they're now called, companies in our target clusters of software, athletic, outdoor wear, clean tech, and advanced manufacturing, and then also existing businesses that are non-traded sector and more local to Portland and or the Central East Side in their business structure. For the traded sector focus, we're really kind of looking at creative office and industrial office cluster firms, and then also craft manufacturing. So in creative office and industrial office, you have a lot of the software firms, you have a lot of the knowledge-based and design firms that you'd find in that type of real estate environment. Craft manufacturing kind of bridges the gap. A lot of that is small businesses that make specialty products like the iPhone case, if you will, and others, but they also are starting to do it in more smaller spaces. They're starting to do it actually in-house versus shipping it out for manufacturing. And a lot of it takes advanced technologies like 3D printing and other components. So that would address not only our economic development strategy, but it would also start to address kind of the changing nature in industry that we keep talking about as well, so as that evolves. For the non-traded sector businesses, and there are indeed a lot in the Central East Side that are either longtime businesses and/or businesses that kind of serve that area. A lot of what the Central East Side Industrial District likes to say is, if you're a business in the Central East Side, you could pretty much get anything you needed for your business in the Central East Side. We've also found that a lot of the middle income wage base is in the Central East Side as well. And currently we get a lot of requests, and we think we'll get continued requests for place-based activities that support them. And so a lot of what we have in place to date, like our storefront improvement program and our development opportunity studies program, where we assist businesses and firms with what they might need to either enhance their building and or what they could potentially do with their building, could be something that we could keep in place to support that non-traded sector employment and industry that actually supports the traded sector industry in the business or in the district. So next steps that we could work on with that include, again, looking at SIP and DOS and other specific activities related to growing industries in the Central East Side, and then also starting to facilitate a conversation between the Central East Side Industrial District and Produce Row to identify opportunities where those could kind of start to interface. Produce Row is a program that PDC created in terms of a focus on entrepreneurial aspirations, if you will, and one of the key things that came out of Produce Row was our Startup Challenge, where we've provided space and funding and legal advice to 4 or 5 startup businesses in the district. We're about to start our next round of that. We're looking for space for that, and that very well could stay in the Central East Side. We haven't really shared with you any of the specific kind of detail that ULI provided us with us. It was like a 100-page presentation with a lot of detail. We've kind of spread it out throughout our presentation. But one of the things that really came up that kind of summarizes it is their slide on takeaways. And so this slide kind of covers that. And I think it's things that we've all kind of talked about through our presentation as well. The first being the changing nature of industry, so transitioning this area from 20th century industrial district to a 21st century district of makers and doers. The timing, they really kind of noted that this transition is going to take time, and I think the important thing to note on that is that there's this desire to have things happen in September of 2015, either then or before that, which is when light rail opens, particularly around the stations in the Southern Triangle. That might not happen in that timing. It might take a little more time to kind of evolve from the Central District, where all the activity is happening, down into the Southern Triangle. They acknowledge the need to kind of look and explore at the changing definition of industrial uses, and this gets at what Troy was saying with the phone. Right now, if you make the phone, you can be in the Central East Side. If you make the app on the phone, there are components and areas of the Central East Side where you can't actually house your business. The emphasis on the employment strategy and not just land use regulation, and that we'll also need key implementation partners. And I think we've kind of identified those throughout our presentation as well. And then finally, Portland is Portland. And I kind of look at this one in regards to we need to walk that fine line between making it work and getting it out of our own way. There's a lot of success that's happening in the district, and a heavy touch from us in regards to what can or cannot happen might actually water that down. So then this slide kind of walks you through where next steps are headed for all of our bureaus over the next 2 to 3 years, if you will, with a focus on an end date of fall 2015. That's when light rail opens. That's when likely we'll have some Southeast Quadrant zoning in place or an understanding of what it will be. And then for PDC, likely to have our development strategy for our focus in the Central East Side at that time. And if you work backwards from that, you get to an emphasis right now on BPS's Central City 2035 Southeast Quadrant process. But concurrent to that, you've got work from PDC and also PBOT throughout 2014 and 2015 that focuses on kind of supporting the Southeast Quadrant with our own work. I'd also note that in regards to the ULI Fellowship, it's a year-long fellowship, and we're kind of midway. So in April, we'll be going back to ULI for a working retreat where we'll report out on the panel visit in February, their homework, and where we're making progress. In the summer, we'll work with them on an ongoing basis. In October, we actually do a final report out to ULI on what we found through their process and how we're moving forward on any and all of their findings. And then concurrent to that, I just want to note that PDC has some ongoing Central East Side projects. If you think about the Burnside Bridgehead project, we have active development on all 4 blocks of that site up in the north end of the district. We do have Produce Row and the Startup Challenge, and then we are actively working to acquire that ODOT blocks in the middle of the district such that something could occur on that site, whether that be a development agreement in hand or breaking ground on a project along the same timeline as September 2015. And so finally, this is the slide I think that's intended for the discussion in terms of your conversation about the Southeast Quadrant Plan and the Central East Side in terms of what can the city do to promote the Central East Side as a 21st century employment center. And the 3 kind of sub-questions under that are the questions that we pose to ULI specifically as well, in terms of what solutions would promote job density and new employers around the light rail stations. What is the best mix of policy and zoning to promote the Southern Triangle for this objective? And how can transportation and other infrastructure support business and create a sense of place? And we're happy to answer any questions or clarify items as part. Those are too hard.
Susan, you're the grand master of this process today, so.
I guess I can speak to my commissioner first and then maybe Patrick, just in terms of, I think for many of you who are on the Planning and Sustainability Commission, we've spent the past 2 or 3 or 4 years kind of up in the vision area. We've been doing the big picture. And this really brings it down to the street level in terms of trying to translate those big picture views around the metrics around increasing jobs, around what's the equity issues around various income levels, around various families, around different groups in the city being able to access those jobs. I noticed when we were talking about Portland Public Schools that I saw Karen cringe a little as the superintendent.
It's natural.
Superintendent right, you know, and said that there was more than one school district in the city, and there's more than Portland Public Schools for partners. We talked a lot about in the Planning Sustainability Commission around environmental quality issues, around increasing multimodal transportation, about people walking around, building community, and that even in an industrial area, you need green. You need places for people to go at lunch and to walk around, and that there needs to be a way to get to the river. And, you know, maybe there's pocket parks. Maybe there's something else that in areas around the country that are more like this, that they use. So those are some of the things that maybe connect what is very much, at this point, we're going to take you down into the streets, and for the next few meetings that we're having as the Planning and Sustainability Commission, we're going to be talking a lot about, you know, how do we grow industry? Do we need to look at the zoning in a different way? Do we need to redefine industrial? So I just wanted to give you that as sort of some fodder, and maybe Patrick has some other.
Well, first off, I apologize for being late. Hopefully my absence was explained. I'm now on a jury, but thankfully the courts adjourn at 4:30 every day. So you've obviously got a ton of information on this, and you know, the Central East Side, as Geraldine mentioned, in some respects, when we think about what PDC has been pursuing from a jobs perspective over the past 3 or 4 years, is really kind of the kind of best practice or the model for everything we do. It really does have this great combination of various activities, different sectors represented, the future in some respects of the Portland economy, both in terms of what we're seeing on the software side, technology side, but there's also a lot of stuff still being made, and so it really is this. You know, I think it represents our ambitions for our economy in the future, and so for us, it really is. What we do here is really a statement about how we think about the future of the economy, and so that's why for us it's really important from a PDC perspective, right? And I I'm not sure what Chair Andrews shared at the beginning, but we bring projects, we bring deals to our board. I mean, our board really acts takes action on things. We lend money, we buy real estate, we sell real estate, we enter development agreements. And that, that's the kind of stuff that we will always do, and we'll look at an area like this and we'll focus on trying to find opportunities. But we need to come together with our partners around this because to accomplish all these things, it really does involve kind of rethinking how it's zoned, what does the city want out of this district? And we see conflicting uses. We see the issue that Geraldine mentioned, where we're trying to help companies, trying to be agnostic about where they should go. And then they say, well, we want to go here. And we say, well, yeah, our rules actually don't allow this type of company here. But 2 blocks over, you can operate here. Companies don't want to hear that. They really don't want to hear that. And on the face of it, there's nothing really wrong with this. I mean, this company should be somewhere in this geography. So we would love to be able to break down those barriers in a way that allows all these great companies to continue to thrive here, but in a way that still preserves this great district. And we know what can happen when we go for development only, because we've seen it in the Pearl, and we know what can happen when we want to build something from scratch. We've seen it in the South Waterfront. We're trying for something different here, and I think that's the challenge. And maybe I'll just end there. That's really, there's no right answer on this. So we really, the more minds that we put to this, the better. The story probably told earlier today, the folks from ULI said, well, we don't get it. Why don't you just put your industry over here and you have your neighborhood here? And we're like, no, that's not what we do. We want this here. We want this jobs district here, and we want to maintain it, and we want to figure it out. So we want to figure out the great solution that allows us to promote development, transit-oriented development, and job creation all in the same place. And because we have a history of tackling these things, this is what we want to accomplish here. And so I don't think we have all the answers, and I think it would be great to hear, what people's thoughts are. And it doesn't have to be the global solution. It can be individual slices of it or different perspectives. It's the more minds, the better. And then Troy gets to go write the code. So.
Don also was the chair of maybe even Debbie should come up and part of the discussion.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about our committee a little bit. Debbie and I are chairing an advisory committee of 30 people, which is a big committee. And the 30 people is a very dynamic mix of folks. Institutions, nonprofits, educators, property owners. These folks own the property, and they operate businesses there too. So it's a really dynamic committee. It's a real insightful committee. I think it's a committee that'll take a balanced approach because they have diverse needs. There's guys who have 20 trucks outside their buildings over there, and then there's also creative startup folks that are working in spaces. So I stand very encouraged by the content of that committee and what I've heard from them over 4 meetings. We've been very well informed by staff from the planning perspective and the transportation perspective, luckily, because one of the keys from my perspective is going to be balancing our great creative ideas with functionality. How do we move freight through there? How does the circulation work? I contend that we can take a balanced approach. And Patrick, as you said, it's already a great area. There's energy, there's development, I cannot believe the job density they're getting in the DOS area. That's surprising. It's 10 times what a suburban industrial park does. So I'm encouraged by that vitality. It's like we can't hurt it. I think whatever we do is going to enhance it. So our committee is going to meet for 12 months. You said 16 months. I was giving you all room there. Appreciate the room. Appreciate the room. But I think, I joke that those are tough questions. They are tough questions, but I think our committee can work through all those as we move ahead. I'm also really happy that you're doing these projects, these example projects, because there's so many people that relate to projects at a scale. It's hard to talk about the whole district because there's different parts of the district. There's the South Triangle, the area around Benson High School, the different zoning districts. The projects people can relate to. And so I think it's an excellent approach. And I've noticed you've kind of taken a sampling at different areas in the site, kind of like diagnostics that'll tell us how those different zones work, especially the station areas. So all the people on the committee, you know, all the folks that have businesses there, they know it's going to change, but none of them are going to run away. They're going to stay there, and I think they're going to try to affect the changes that happen there. So those are a few comments. So I look forward. We've kind of learned a lot about the district. We've absorbed a lot of information. We're just kind of inching up on some scenarios, alternatives at what might happen in the district. And I think we're having some workshops or charrettes in June, Troy? Yes. So we're at a real key point right now this spring. So that's my report on the committee.
Why don't we just take comments from people or questions? Chris, we'll start with you.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around the office employment question. You know, I got to know this district serving on the East Side Streetcar Committee, and you know, we clearly got the message. You need to thread the streetcar through the mixed use area and not disrupt our industrial sanctuaries. I learned that lesson and came to think of Central East Side as
Tough guys.
a place where you have, and some of those friends are here today. Tend to think of the Central East Side as a place where you have non-office jobs. But I hear that there's more and more creative office, and I'm trying to understand how that works with other parts of the Central City. I think of my own industry in software, where, you know, at Big Pink, where unfortunately as fast as US Bank empties out space, software companies are filling it up. So I guess that's the good part. I think of software as something you can stack a lot more vertically than we're going to stack things in the Central East Side. So what part of the creative office industries are seeking, you know, the traditional downtown office spaces versus this district, and what's motivating them to this district, and is that going to get in the way of the makers we want to have in this district?
I'm glad you started with an easy question. You know, they want to be everywhere. And so we were just did a building tour last week. We were looking at some of the companies that are in the East Bank Commerce Center. For instance, there's, what was the name of the software company?
East Side Exchange?
East Side Exchange, yeah.
Cascade Energy.
No, I'm sorry. It's actually at the other building. But the point being, when we talked to their owner, they said, you know, the entire city is experiencing tremendous growth in software, and we can barely bring in people fast enough. People are moving here. It's not that the local pool has been absorbed. They're coming in and they're locating where they can be. Now, why the Central East Side? It's a good question. I think part of it is there's something to be said about, and this isn't to seem cute, but it's just kind of this industrial chic thing that people really have been attracted to. And in part, that was what the EOS was intended to address. It was trying to look at some rehab of a lot of these existing buildings that may have been a perfect multi-story structure when industry occupied multi-story structures back 100 or 80 years ago. Otherwise, some of those buildings would probably be sitting vacant. There's high demand for uses that are like software. The advantage of those is that typically the customer does not come to them as much as it would if it was, say, a professional service like an attorney's or a medical office, something like that. So the idea was being that there wouldn't really be any harm in having them over there. I mean, there are some parking impacts for sure, but not as bad as if they were someplace else. A lot of them work and live in the central east, or not live in the central east side, but they live on the east side. They like the easy commute there. So when you go through these buildings, you will find that there are a lot more parks, a lot of dogs as well, but a lot of bikes that are parked in these buildings. They just like the amenity there. They kind of like the solitude in some respects as well. Now, people who are located in the Big Pink, and there's another one that's happening is the Commonwealth building. More unlikely that when they go into those spaces, they're not going in and keeping the drop ceilings. They're tearing it out and trying to make it look like the industrial space they couldn't get in the Central East Side. And they're paying a real top dollar to see that happen. So we've talked to a number of architects, and their bread and butter is turning in these Class A spaces and making them look like faux industrial space. And they're paying CBD rates. So another thing to note is that per square foot, a lot of these software companies for this industrial office space are paying the same rate they would be paying to be in the Big Pink. The difference is that in the Big Pink, and not all of them are doing this, but a lot of them would be using cubicle space or walls. Here in the Central East Side, they're tearing it out, they're using an open floor plate, and they're putting in more employee per square foot, so they're getting a little bit more out of their money for that.
And are we worried that that's going to displace the makers? I mean, you can have software on the Central East Side, you're never going to have an ADX in Big Pink, right? So are we going to have room for the ADXs in the middle?
Well, I think the question comes is what happens when the market starts to support new construction, but so far with the rehabs, we're not seeing it. And as I mentioned, we saw 1,000 new jobs occur there during the depths of the recession, and we only saw one industrial business leave.
So I'm in the office space building, I'm responsible for 1 million square feet downtown. And part of it is traditional office, Union Bank Building, Columbia Square, Crown Plaza. Part of it is non-traditional office. We're renovating the old Yamhill Marketplace. And we put JAMA in at $22 triple net. I can't get $20 a square foot for space in Crown Plaza on a full service basis. So I know 5 years from now, I'm going to wish I had 100 two in Taylor's and no Crown Plaza and Columbia Squares, but I'm stuck with them. So I've got to move forward. But from what I've seen, all of the growth in employment in the last few years has really been in that software and app business. We have eBay has just taken the 5th floor in the old state office building. They weren't even here 3 years ago. And they are tearing out the traditional office and opening up to the concrete ceiling and putting in new mechanical and electrical, and it's really great that they're investing in my building. But I think, you know, this is East Side's and renovated space is where these companies want to be. I mean, if US Bank would not be filling up with those kind of users right now if there was available space in Central East Side, or, you know, if there were other buildings that they could renovate into this funky open space that they can do business within. I think one of the real opportunities here is we've got some what I would call more mature companies that are getting bigger, of course eBay being one of them and JAMA being another, and you've read about some others that are 30 or 40,000 feet. We still have a ton of them that are little tiny guys, and they need some place to go. And so right now we've got a place for the big ones and we've got a place for the little ones, but there's not really a place for the in-between ones. And I think there's an opportunity here to build the right kind of stuff or renovate the right kind of stuff for them for that next step that they need to go to.
And I think there's
The in-between companies, how big as space users are they, kind of in general?
I'm going to say the 3,000 to 12, 13,000 foot type
The whole concept
pieces.
of business has changed dramatically, and the people that are doing it has changed dramatically, and how they do it has changed. So tall office buildings are not only in demand, they're not where you want to be. You kind of want to be in a more funky setting. And Portland certainly has moved to that almost organically in a way.
I would say 2 good examples of new construction that might actually come through and provide an outlet for that is the 2040 Clay Building, which is the old electric site on 2nd and Clay. They just received enough TOD funding through Metro that they're actually going to release that building. And what that solves is this issue where there's kind of a real estate pipeline issue, if you will, where a lot of the industries or firms like JAMA and Cascade Energy and whatever one you mentioned, they only think so far in advance in regards to their expansion needs. And so when they finally said, hey, we need new space, there's not actually a building online that can provide that space. And the construction timeline for a new building is longer than the time that they need in terms of getting into new space. So 2040 Clay coming under construction could actually start to alleviate that because there will be available space in new construction that looks like old warehouse type development that could provide that opportunity with the larger floor plates. I'd say the other example that's of interest in regards to getting to your kind of question about industry is the New York project that's in the Northwest area. That's 5/1 industrial development. So it's F occupancy, multi-story industrial, that is also a spec building. They just got their first tenant. Their first tenant is a small manufacturer of violins, but they expect that by the time that project is open, they'll have a lot of that filled. You can imagine buildings like that in the Central East Side that can accommodate manufacturing, but then can also accommodate some of the app users, if you will, in an office environment too. Because those buildings will be adaptable in terms of F occupancy and B occupancy. What's going to be important to note is how you kind of blend the two that allow industry to grow, but also acknowledge the kind of that changing nature of what you might need in a building in regards to production space versus sitting at a computer type space.
Mike? Yeah, it sounds to me, based on the presentation, that ULI fellows are going to get at least as much out of your partnership with them as the city's going to get from ULI. We just have gone through a very intense conversation about industrial land needs and jobs, particularly jobs that don't require a college degree. So I was really pleased to hear, I mean, it seems to me there's quite a lot of potential here to at least partially crack that nut, and I'd be interested in staff responses. I was pleased to hear Grant's comments about green infrastructure, parks, the need for parks, and trees, albeit with the caveat of not interfering with truck movement in the district. And a concern I've had is that in situations like this, where we're looking for job creation, economic development, that there has been a tendency to say, well, even though the city has a 33% tree canopy goal, we're at 26 or 27 now, we can't afford to have a lot of trees in this area that might compete with job creation. I think there are ways we can address that, and I was pleased to hear the reference to green infrastructure and Susan's comment about the need to have at least pocket parks for folks who are working there to have access to. And we know that there are incredibly dense cities. Paris, I was just in Paris recently, lots of little hidden green areas people can get to that don't take a huge amount of space, but I think provide that kind of respite. Those are just some of my thoughts off the top of my head. I will just simply say I know the city has done, with regard to climate change, has done some research on the potential for decreasing urban heat island effect in this specific area through eco-roofs and certainly through tree plantings. So I think there are great opportunities to accomplish all the goals we're talking about, but also have that green infrastructure integrated.
And just to hit on that real fast, Mike, one of the things we've been doing, this project's been fun from that perspective, because it allows me to put my landscape architect hat on for a change. And rather than, we've talked to Bureau of Environmental Services as well as Parks to say, we support the goals you've been trying to do elsewhere in the city, but we think in this district it needs to be more context sensitive, if you will. So the idea of how do you treat stormwater? Is it the same swell you would put in at Klickitat and 30th, or is it or at PSU, or is it one that's really looking at how you make sure you can also maintain freight mobility? Maybe rather than canopy, you're looking at green roofs or green walls. There's a lot of ways to address this. So we're trying to say, let's have the same objective, but let's try to bring a different set of tools to this. And same with parks as well. I think the opportunity, we haven't not done pocket parks before. This might be an area where that's the right model to at least explore.
Yeah, I was really pleased to hear you bring up the issue of green walls. I actually was in Paris in September, and they've got some significant ones there. And it's interesting to watch people walk by these things. They cannot pass by without actually going up and interacting with, touching that green wall, and it achieves a lot of the same purposes, functions. Karen?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, but I'll just pick one or two. I saw up on the slide an extension of the URA to $20 million, adding up to $25 million. And I wanted to know what your process was for that and timing, and what kinds of things you were thinking about using that money for.
So at the proposal to increase, to expand this URA is part of a broader package of changes that the mayor is currently proposing, and there are now conversations happening informally with council. But when it becomes official proposal that will need to move forward, the actual changes depend on which area. On the Central East Side, the expansion it ultimately requires council approval, it requires public notice, and then also our process normally requires consultation with the Portland Public Schools and the county as well. Those are the kind of the two major taxing jurisdictions that normally are consulted on those changes. But after a notice period and those consultations, it would go to city council for approval, and that would most likely be, you know, it would not, probably not happen before the end of or sometime around the end of this calendar year, if we go forward with those changes.
And the funding would be used for?
And the funding, the additional money would be, it would go into our budget for this district. I think right now, our priority is to invest as much of it as possible in support of these plans, but there is a broader geography on the Central East Side, and so there would be, I think, other priorities that would have to be considered in addition to this. But I think we would start out by assuming that much of this would go into supporting the kind of development that we're talking about in this presentation.
Don?
A quick question, Geraldine, you mentioned the ODOT sites, which I consider real important, they're gateway sites, and that you're gonna buy those. Not you personally, right? Who's gonna purchase those sites, and is it a willing seller?
So PDC is structuring a conversation with ODOT on those blocks. They need to declare them surplus, so we're working with them through that process. I think the thing to note is that there are portions of those blocks that need to remain in ODOT ownership given the freeway, and their need to access the freeway, their stormwater needs, and then long range plans, very preliminary plans for the future of the freeway. So what we're working with them on is, if you think about kind of slicing those lots in half, north to south, that the eastern portions would be available for development. It's about 120 feet of depth on average.
Really the key, that's the key half.
Correct. So the pieces along Water Avenue, if you will, and that the remainder portions would remain in ODOT ownership, but would be available for long-term lease.
Okay.
And that we potentially could enter in and substitute for them on those components. Part of what we found in our analysis was that those pieces that need to remain with them are perfect for parking. They're perfect for surface parking, green space, access to the river, if you will, but that they're difficult for companies to use in terms of financing for their projects because ODOT issues those on a month-to-month lease. And they may be very long-term, 30-year, month-to-month leases, but it's difficult for a bank to get their head around that. If we were to step in and assume those, then we could, start to work with different development interests on the pieces we'll purchase that could also take advantage of the leased pieces for parking and
Well,
whatnot.
it seems like if you could do great buildings along Water Avenue and park in the back, that's a good solution.
That's a good thing.
Howard?
Well, first of all, it's good to be here. And I want to say on behalf of my fellow commissioners that we've been long overdue to sit down with you all and work in common cause. And so I want to make a plug that we make this not the first, but of many times we work together, not in general briefing, but in the general concept of how we want these agencies to function. I'm curious about retail. You never mentioned anything about that in the East Side section. But I want to marry that with another thought that you said that I was very impressed with. Sometimes the city needs to get out of the way and allow things to happen organically. And I think more than anything, I believe that's a lot of what we've seen in the city is organic progress. So marrying that idea with good, intelligent planning and lending of money is a good thing. I also think it's the Inner East Side is a transportation dream, because if these businesses are what I think they are, a lot of people are going to ride their bikes. And with the coming of new ways to bring bike and pedestrian traffic, it can make you a star in the international transportation world.
She already is.
But what I really want to ask you about is who's going to get displaced here? Who's going to get moved away from the Near and East Side that's going to create a interesting problem that I'll just visit the word gentrification around. I don't want to create a big explosion here, but I want to know, as we make this a more palatable part of Portland, who gets pushed where, and how do we take care of that?
We hope no one. We've been using the phrase, in terms of what our objectives are, is to not create industrial gentrification. And so we were pretty happy to see that while we had tremendous growth in the last 6 years, we really haven't seen displacement as a result of that in the employment opportunity sub-area. And so we're mindful of that going forward, though. We want to make sure that as we allow for more opportunity for some of this multi-story, whether it's small craft manufacturing or industrial office with software, that we're not increasing the land value to exponential amounts that make it hard for the existing businesses to survive. Because a lot of these smaller manufacturing businesses, they're paying a couple dollars a square foot, triple net. They're not paying $28 a square foot. So that becomes a big issue. So we're going to continue to try to work that angle. I think one of the keys is probably making sure that it remains primarily an employment district. I mean, I think one of the things you can do, and we see this everywhere else, is as soon as you open up the entitlements to a lot of height and a lot of floor area and a lot of different uses, most notably a lot of retail, and more importantly residential, you start to really blow open the ability for those people to survive. And so I think we need to be very careful about how much we would expand that kind of flexibility more than anything at this point.
I think we all have to realize that if we were in almost any other city, that would almost be heresy, sort of that conversation, to be able to say that we don't want more office or housing. It's right on the river. That could be the best place, anywhere to have incredible housing with a view of downtown. So there are pressure, and there are people on Don's committee who definitely, think that that's something that we should be considering more. That the highest and best use of some of this land could be housing, could be commercial or office space, or more retail. And so that's a little bit of the question here, is as we redefine what is industrial and potentially grow that OES area to potentially a larger portion of it, are we doing some displacement of some of the older industrial jobs? We don't know yet, but we'd surely like you to all be thinking about that in terms of, because we're, literally in a year from now, we are going to make decisions on, what's going to be zoned what and what kind of changes we're going to propose. And so if there's a push, by several property owners to be able to want to have housing that are not in the housing quarters that are designated now, and so we'd like to hear about that.
One of the things, go ahead.
Question. So as we define industrial more broadly, how does that end up interacting with Goal 9 and a requirement for making sure that we're providing enough, what the state considers industrial land would be one question. Also, piggybacking on what Mike said, I was happy to see the reference to job training. And so I'd be interested in knowing how we're doing that in parallel, because I think that's part of the equity question as well, making sure that we're actually training people for these jobs. And how we're going to make sure that that basically doesn't fall through the cracks here.
I can try to tackle the Goal 9 question. I think what we're seeing is that we have a finite supply of industrial land, both in this district as well as elsewhere. But we have this increasing demand for job space. And so if we did it as one-story kind of low-density type development, we're not going to be able to meet the demand in this district. So that's really forcing us towards this multi-story model. And we're curious to see how this New York project works, where you start seeing kind of a return to last century's multi-story manufacturing kind of thing. That's pretty new. And how that can also be combined with these other industries, these more digital type industries that are also kind of filling these industrial sectors, and how that can help out. We're also seeing that, a lot of people who would have located in the district maybe, or did locate in the district 100 years ago, so say a warehouse and distribution company, if they were going to start today, this probably wouldn't be their first stop, because it doesn't meet the kind of efficiencies that their business demands these days. They're going to be out near Airport Way. They're going to be closer to the port. And they need one-story, large sites, lots of parking, quicker access to freeways, a lot less congestion than they would find in the Central East Side. So there's a lot of things. Now, it's not to say that we don't want to continue to support those kind of businesses that are there, but this is a different kind of industrial district, and it's quickly evolving, not only just because there's efficiencies that are changing, but the types of industries are broadening. So I think, if we can attract those uses here, that's great.
Quick question. So do you see this as an incubator district to a significant extent? Do you think the size of the businesses will stay so that they fit in this area, or ultimately, a lot of them are going to outgrow the area and will need other industrial places within the city or the region for them to move to?
Yes, it's an incubator district. There is an incredible amount of manufacturing occurring in very small spaces. And when those companies, there's one who's on our steering committee, Sean Small with Ruckus Composites. They're the two-man shop. When we first met them, they were doing carbon fiber bike repair and manufacturing. One of the few people in the country that does this. In the last 12 months, they've grown to a firm of about 8 or so. They've moved to another location in the Central East Side that's larger. This isn't unique to manufacturing. It's happening in the software industries as well. They're starting here. It's cheaper, it's close in, it has everything they need in the district. They continue to expand. What we're trying to figure out is how we can provide space that allows them to stay in the district, or at least in the city.
Yep, thank you.
You know, I think on this expanding, the notion of expanding the definition of industrial, I mean, maybe it's just kind of semantics or just nuance, but I don't really think of it as expanding it, like diluting it. Like I really think we ought to be very careful about that concept. I think it really is, like it's been said, trying to think about the changing nature of work. I mean, so if we say, well, no, it should be industrial, and this is how industrial works, then I think we're immediately behind the times. So part of this is, how do we recognize the changing nature of work and create a framework that allows businesses to flourish in that environment, and the line between designing and making things is blurring, and the size of companies that make things is changing. I mean, so part of this is trying to reflect that, and this goes back to your question, and it's not just office. Like, we're not trying to just make another office environment. We really are trying to kind of leap ahead in our thinking about how we promote this. And so a lot of it could be job density was the driver of what's allowed here, or value added is the driver here, as opposed to the kind of typical definitions of different kinds of work. And on the job training side, you know, we're not, through this, taking on the job training, you know, challenge that we have. There's already lots of programs that are happening, lots of organizations that are trying to figure out how to solve what's actually going to be a growing skills gap, and particularly around manufacturing. We have an aging workforce. There's a lot of companies throughout the region that are going to be looking for skilled labor, and this pipeline issue that Geraldine mentioned is one of the issues. And so I think the opportunity here in the Central East Side is, as we redefine what work is like, you can redefine what it means to be in a manufacturing job, so maybe it looks different than what people are currently used to thinking about it, particularly folks who are much younger than us, and then we can help the pipeline into the existing job training programs. We're not trying to reinvent job training. And organizations like ADX are really important in that, because they are creating an environment in which people can experiment with making things that feels very different than if you were to go into a kind of traditional job training program. So a lot of this is what we're grappling with. This is why it is kind of new territory for it. But it isn't just a kind of dilution of this word of industrial. It really is kind of a reinvention of it.
On?
Yeah, quick, I want to respond to the point that Howard brought up on gentrification, because, you know, we can't just leave it between the lines. And our committee hasn't left it between the lines. It comes up in every meeting. And it's interesting, you know, they're worried about, you know, a balanced approach, and they're worried about, you know, higher value uses pushing out some of the other businesses. But the compatibility is not just in the economic side. The compatibility is on the adjacent land uses side that they're concerned about. It's the complaint factor of if you put residential near an active business or a noisy business, or one that's relying on a lot of movement around its perimeter, that's a problem. And so, you know, the committee's addressing it pretty thoroughly, and I'm happy that people that operate businesses are on the committee, and so they can talk about it intelligently and understand it. So it's being considered as we move ahead.
Yeah, for those of you who didn't have the privilege to serve on the industrial lands healthy Watersheds Advisory Committee.
To be on that sucker.
There were three recommendations that came out of that work that are relevant to this conversation. One was the need for intensification, which we're talking about here, in my opinion. The other was to think differently about what kinds of jobs constitute industrial jobs, and that's the 20th versus the 21st century riff here. And the third was that we need to stop conversion of industrial land to other uses, and I think it's incumbent upon the Planning and Sustainability Commission to take a firm stand when that issue comes up, and we do make recommendations to City Council. And we saw that there, and we all know that there have been previous conversions which have helped put us in the corner with regard to lack of industrial land. So we address those issues in that committee. I think those recommendations we need to act on as a commission, as two commissions.
And Mike, I think I see this whole district as part of the solution. And really, because as you said, it gets at job density, and it has the infrastructure backbone to do that. There's alternative forms of access and transportation. There are things that knit the district together that a Rivergate doesn't have, or an airport district doesn't have, or any industrial park or business park on the perimeter of Portland. They don't have that. And so I really see this as a place to take advantage of that job density.
I would just kind of echo what Don and Howard and Mike and Michelle have said around the issue of displacement. I have office space down there, so I see the big trucks block a street in the employment zone for 4 or 5 hours, unloading and loading and whatever. And I think the first problem really to solve is, as you can see it today, the new businesses that come into some of these spaces, the people complain about the truck and the produce people that are pulling up to get work, to get their produce or furniture or whatever unloaded. And so trying to preserve, it's how do you preserve that business so that that complaint doesn't overwhelm the business and pushes them out from a transportation standpoint. The displacement is probably not going to come from the property value till late. The complaint will be there first, and it's already occurring. The second is parking. It's a parking nightmare. I don't know where the 60% parking is. I park down there every day. I'm looking for
those spaces,
I'm looking for that space. But I will tell you, the older businesses, the people that do the produce and stuff, drive their cars and park. The newer people come in and park. There is a wage differential between the guy in that factory cleaning lettuce and the guy doing software or something. There's a substantial, I would say, wage difference. Somehow we need to think about how do we preserve that ability for that person to park at an affordable rate in a method that either has them park or gets them transit. Because transit right now for them, I know from just working with New Seasons and some of the people that they brought in, the transit doesn't work for them to get to work in that district. And so if you're changing the parking or something, you're gonna displace the business because they can't get a worker to work at $10 or $11 an hour. And that is really, that's the other part of that, is that's the diversity of the district, because those are much of the diversity of, if you look at where they eat, the lunch cart pulls up and honks the horn, and those people come out to eat, and the people drop out of the other buildings, go to the food carts. And it's just you can see the diversity of that. So how we preserve that in what's called the non-traded sector, the long-term businesses, is important. Because, yeah, we want the growth, but we want to be able to say to that long-term business, I think as you're saying, Don, how do you keep your employees the ability to come and work in my business? Because if they can't come, they can't park, it's too expensive, they're going to lose employees, and pretty soon they're out of business, not because of the rent, but because they've got too many complaints, the city has come down there and said, you can't park your truck now 3 or 4 stacked deep, and, you know, pretty soon they're out of business. So I think that's the problem we need to think about and solve.
I want to follow up and ask if you could give me a little more information on why employees wouldn't be able to come to work via transit.
Well, they're coming from, it's a, and this is not, but it is a problem of trying to, where they live relative to, they're not on a streetcar line, they're not downtown. So they're coming from East County or out further. And so when you look, you know, that's part of the issue is where do the new term residents, I don't know where they're living, but where do the long-term residents live? Because they're at the lower end of the wage scale, probably. And those are the people that, if you're trying to preserve them, you want to put transit solutions in front of them that can work so that hopefully we alleviate the transit problem. Because I suspect if you put housing along the light rail line, the new Milwaukee light rail, you'll have a lot of people living there that work on Central East Side. But these people are out further.
You know, Andre, on the transit and the parking side, I think both sides have to work on it. The employers need to do planning with their staff too about how to solve it. And we need to be aware of it as good committee members and advisors. A lot of times, Leah, there's night shift too. A lot of people are working off hours, and sometimes those conflict with the AM peak when people come into the district arc. So some of it's the off-schedule work requirements of some of the older businesses.
Well, I think it's a combined approach. I mean, we want it to grow, we want to get new businesses in, we want that growth, and we've seen the continued growth. But at the same time, that growth can cause unintended consequences, I guess, and we don't want the displacement in the future. And I think transportation will be one cause. You know, obviously the price of the building and those things are going to be another. And one of the things as we think about displacement, I think long term, is how do we help a business owner that truly makes a business decision? I can make more money versus A in my building to B, but how do we help him, his employees or whatever, if he decides he wants to take his business elsewhere, but repurpose that building to do something? How do we help him through that transition so that we don't just lose the business and we don't lose those employees, but we help him if that's his business model that he wants to choose and he's a long-term business owner, I can take and do this business maybe in Rivergate, and I can go then repurpose my business that is a full block, because many of those businesses are full blocks. How do I repurpose that building to a higher and better use and more money from him?
You know, another thing to keep in mind about this workforce that we're talking about is their demographics changing too. They're getting younger. It's not old guys over there throwing lettuce crates.
No, it's very young
so,
people.
You know, I think that the key is that if we make the district better, that workforce is going to want to be there, as opposed to being isolated
I think we
somewhere
need
else.
skateboard parks.
So
there is one just down the street. There is one.
Get around.
I mean, I think that's really the answer. Who do you call to fix your computer? His grandchild.
But my point is that I think if we make it better, the employees are going to be attracted to work there. Obviously, we still need to deal with the parking and the access and everything else in a balanced approach, but the decisions we make, I hope, are going to elevate the district.
Yeah.
And keep what's great about it and enhance it.
If I could make a quick point about the parking issue. Don, you mentioned that the shift times might affect, they might fall outside of transit service hours. So that's definitely a concern. That also is relevant when you're talking about parking as well. So if your shift starts at 5 or 6 a.m., it's going to be a lot easier to find a space than if your shift starts at noon. So, you know, that burden isn't necessarily even across different industries in terms of when they might have shifts starting and ending. Mr. Ball, you mentioned the 60% occupancy of parking. That study showed that, with the exception of down by OMSI, it was pretty well occupied down there, but it was pretty well dispersed throughout the district. So you'd find, you know, a lot here, a lot there that just had 10 unused spots for whatever reason, whatever the number might be. And part of that stems from the fact that if you have a business with a parking lot, the code would require you to use that parking as accessory, so you couldn't rent it out hourly or weekly or monthly to anybody. Those regulations have been in place for probably about 20 years now, and the thought behind them at the time was they didn't want the Central East Side to turn into a park and ride for downtown. The off-street spaces, they could drive up the cost. If you can pay $10 less to park here than you would park downtown, then maybe you're pushing out employees who would need that parking, and that would place additional pressures on businesses. So one of the things that we're going to explore as we develop our transportation demand management strategy for the district, now that we have this organization, this Transportation and Parking Advisory Committee, that is envisioned to sort of administer the on-street parking permit program that we've had in place for a number of years. It may be possible to have them sort of act as a brokerage for off-street parking as well. So if you have a business that has 25 parking spots and you only need 15 of them, maybe you can then contract with this TPAC and get 10 spaces that are sold to other businesses in the district they can then give to their employees, and that would sort of alleviate the concern that the price is going to just go up and up as people bid for it on the open market. So that's something we're going to explore. I don't know how that would exactly work, but we'll look into it.
Can I just highlight a few more development-related issues just for future conversation, maybe with my board? But we do, the issues that have been brought up will put PDC in a position of thinking about, in addition to just our straight-up investments in developments that would, more generally speaking, be designed to be catalytic. So the strategic sites that Geraldine mentioned, a lot of times it's, okay, what if we do this, can we attract outside investment? There is the parking issue, and there's a lot of talk of structured parking, and so if structured parking is going to happen, it's likely going to have to be kickstarted by some kind of public investment to make it work. And so parking is a topic that we'll come back to in this district. And then the second thing is really how do we best use our dollars to make projects happen that preserve, it's almost like affordable housing, but for industrial uses. So if we put money in buildings, can we maintain affordability? Because we will see rents rise. They will go up. It's going to happen. I think by limiting the uses, we're going to keep it within a certain band, but it's going to get more expensive. And frankly, it has to get more expensive in order for us to see the kind of development we want to happen there. If we keep the rents artificially low, you're just not going to attract capital to do new construction. So we have to allow some inflation to happen, and then maybe our role is, like I said, the way we do housing, to buy down the cost of industrial space to maintain it if we really do believe that preserving that space is essential to the district. And that would be, in some respects, a high-class problem to have if we really are seeing development happen across the district of the existing commercial buildings. But I think that's, when we talk about the $25 million that we may have to spend, I do think from a PDC perspective, we're going to be looking at those kind of decisions, because over that period of time, it's not a lot of money to spend. And what's our role in promoting development? Is it project by project, or is it these more general solutions like parking? So.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah, it's a different subject. I just wanted to go back to a comment that was made earlier, and that I was pleased to hear a couple of people bring up freight, because I think from the transportation perspective, on top of parking, freight is going to be one of our biggest challenges in the area, because of a lot of the businesses there. And as these new businesses come in and they want placemaking and they want social fabric in the neighborhood where they are, that impedes into the public right-of-way, and freight has the least options available to them when we make those changes. So it's just something to keep in mind as we think about how this district changes.
Just as a wrap-up we can keep going, but I wanted to let the Portland Development Commission members know that I think what we'll do is we'll come back when we get the draft Southeast Quadrant Plan. We can do it jointly, or we can just come back at one of your regular meetings and sort of brief you on, here's where we ended up and here's what we're proposing at this point. And that would give an opportunity for you all to comment. I think Patrick and I and our staff will continue to work together, maybe to look at more metrics, like how many jobs are we really trying to get over the next 25 years in this district? You know, what are the impacts? Who is going to work there? What kind of incomes do they make? Where do they live? You know, all of those kinds of things, because a lot of times we look at the bill, and I know a lot of times you're put in the position as PDC of looking at the infrastructure and one particular project and not being able to look at the whole and the impact that it has and the bigger picture. And so I like when we can do that together a lot better. So.
Good.
I want to say thank you to everybody, the presentation, everybody today. We do need to do this more often, and I would say if we could get on the schedule like every 6 months or so, at least as a plan, and then if we need to do it more, to just have this kind of discussion. And
Better start talking today. It took us 6 months to get this.
yeah, I know. But try to get a regular scheduled meeting, and then, you know, try to, I think it's great to have the sharing of ideas and thoughts about how we're looking at different districts and how we want to accomplish them jointly is perfect. Plus, I just love being in a place where people say, $25 million, that's not a lot of money. It's just.
We got to up our game.
Yeah, we got to up our game. It's just perfect place to be.
I'm not sure if everybody, I think you all have a copy of this in front of you. So we did this in-house, and it's something I'm really proud of in terms of our staff, in terms of writing and,
really nice.
and the graphics and everything. And it really does sort of, it's almost like a graphic novel in that it takes you through the history of the Central East Side and, you know, what the buildings used to be and where they are now. And so I think it's been a really nice piece for people around the community who don't actually walk it. And if you don't walk it, you don't really get what it's like down there. And that's the other option is for both my commission and yours. If you want to go tour at all, Troy and Geraldine and Grant, they've been out there doing tours regularly because it really changes your whole perspective when you walk it and really get to know the area.
You can bike it.
Or you can
Bike it.
Looking forward to hearing more about the distilleries, how the distilleries.
Distilleries are doing, we can do that tour too.
Wants to do a distillery
Sure. Yeah, that would be a good one.
Well, I want to echo Andre's thank you to staff for putting this together and for everybody to take the time to spend with us today. I think this was really quite productive and actually will get better over time because I think we'll have a better understanding of both perspectives and jobs and how, you know, how we have to deal with our responsibility. So great meeting, and thank you so much. And maybe some people can stick around and talk, but I can't.
And hopefully you can come up to our place next time.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.